Hello, and we are continuing with my last about Fitzroy McLean and his role in the Second World War in ex-Yugoslavia. We stopped at this moment where basically Allies decided to start supporting partisans in Yugoslavia as one side in a civil war that was going on in Yugoslavia at the same time as Second World War. And over here we actually see General Patton with his six shooters greeting his armored columns somewhere in France, I suppose. So let's go on.
Because by late 1943 the Allies needed them. In Italy, American and British forces were driving north, but facing stiff German resistance. McLean received a message from Supreme Allied Commander in Italy, General Maitland Wilson, known as Jumbo. The Trieste-Ljubljana railway was a key supply line for the German army in Italy. Jumbo told McLean to get Tito's men and sever that line.
I think we have seen this. Ah, yes, this is the point where I wanted to actually add some comments.
So he and Tito handpicked a group of men, and they marched to the target.
Okay, they marched to the target. This blowed up the railway, blah blah blah.
The railway was heavily guarded. Noticed.
Ah, yes. This is the moment, I think, where...
On the 1st of December 1943, Allied leaders Roosevelt, Stalin and Churchill met for the...
Yes, this is where Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin met to kind of discuss the outcomes of the war. And this is the point where I wanted to add something that had kind of long-term impact on that region. Basically, one of the provisions of these agreements was that sphere of influences in Europe, where sphere of influences were divided for after the war, and it has been decided that sphere of influences in Yugoslavia were to be 50-50, basically 50% for Soviet Union and 50% for Western powers. And I believe now, looking back from this point, that that fact actually tore down Yugoslavia as a nation and kind of broke it into pieces. Yep, that was it. Come on.
First time in Tehran. High on the agenda was the situation in Yugoslavia. The so-called Big Three pledged to give all possible help to the partisans. 9 days later, Churchill flew to Cairo from the Tehran conference. Fitzroy McLean was waiting for him. Churchill told him of the decision taken in Tehran to step up the support for Tito. But McLean voiced concerns.
I said that I had no doubt that the partisans would take power once the war was over and would set up a communist regime. At that point, Winston interrupted me and said, "Do you intend to make Yugoslavia your home after the war? Do you intend to live there?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, neither do I, and therefore had we not better leave it to the Yugoslavs to work out what kind of regime they want?"
McLean returned to Yugoslavia with a clear mission: to rearm and motivate the partisans and drive the Germans out of the country. This time, Churchill's son Randolph was on the mission. McLean had requested his presence, considering him thoroughly dependable, possessing both endurance and determination.
Churchill went partly out of the spirit of adventure and partly because his father asked him to, sending his son a sort of pledge to Tito of how strongly he was going to support Tito and Tito's cause. Tito, I think, was touched by this.
McLean told the partisans to prepare safe landing strips because the Allies were on their way. Bato Tomasevich was one of 18 teams who prepared the runways.
I was assigned with a group of about 10 partisans to go on to a part where was an improvised airport created. Our job was to cut wood during the day and to put it around so that we could light a bonfire at midnight when the British transporter would arrive.
Somewhere in Italy, trucks roll in with supplies for partisan forces in the Balkan. Here at a secret airport, American and British forces are cooperating with Yugoslav guerrillas to maintain this efficient and vital supply line.
The partisans had no idea how much equipment they were about to get. In just 2 nights, they received as much as Mihailovich had in 2 years. Within just a few weeks, British and American planes had delivered or dropped 100,000 rifles, 50,000 machine guns, 1,318 mortars, over 600,000 grenades, almost 100 million rounds of ammunition, 700 radio sets, and 250,000 pairs of boots.
Uniforms, arms, ammunition, food, and what was the most important, recognition as allies of British. So I became dressed in English uniform with the British arms, with the British machine gun.
With American involvement came the propaganda machine. Partisans were followed everywhere by film crews. The conflict in Yugoslavia suddenly acquired glamour.
Women fight side by side with the men, marching against the enemy wherever found.
But one person who was not pleased by this was Colonel Draza Mihailovich. So the royalist Serbian guerrilla leader, still hiding out in the mountains with his Chetniks, tried to win back British favor. His territory straddled a key German supply line, the railway to Greece. He ordered his men to destroy a bridge on that line. A British agent was with him and took these pictures as it was blown up. But the operation backfired when the credit was given to Tito's partisans. Tito, now emboldened.
Yes, this kind of has been quickly skipped over. How come that this credit has been mislabeled? It was later on found that some people, British guys in Cairo working in Egypt were actually secret communists, and they were basically working for Soviet Union, and it was their task to make sure that communist resistance is being promoted and not monarchists. So yeah, that's something that kind of has been documented later on.
Formed a National Council of Liberation, a rival authority to the Yugoslavian government in exile in London. And he appointed himself Supreme Military Commander, Marshal of Yugoslavia. It seemed an appropriate time for McLean to raise the issue of Tito's plans for Yugoslavia after the war. At first, Maclean received reassuring answers. As this telegram to Churchill shows, Tito had no intention of making Yugoslavia part of the Soviet Union or imposing Soviet economics. Now that they had nothing to fear, the order was given that all British contact with the Chetniks must cease. British foreign policy had turned full circle. For Mihailovich and his Chetniks.
Yes, I'd like to jump in here with one comment with regarding this civil war that was going on. And, you know, families that found themselves at that time in this war where you had two sides that were both irregular, basically, military forces, both partisans and Chetniks. Well, for families, it was obvious that one side is going to win, but they they really couldn't say which one. So mothers would, if they have two boys, would kind of tell their boys to go to if they have to go to war, to go to two sides, one son to one side and the other one to other side, so at least one would survive on a victorious side. So it was really in deep tragedy of this clash where you had literally brothers fighting brothers. I actually also seen some documentaries about documentation where some Chetniks has been captured as a prisoners of war by partisans, and a news has been given to one guy on a partisan side that his brother is within that group of captured Chetniks, and he said, "Oh, you may do with him whatever we are doing with the rest of them," and they were all executed. So personal feelings, you know, start running high once your skin is endangered.
The decision was a catastrophe. Abandoned by the Allies, thousands of them changed sides and joined the Nazis. Churchill had further justification for dropping Mihailovich. Now the operation entered a new phase. By the spring of 1944, this military exercise changed from one of supply and support to full-scale Allied collaboration. The Yugoslavs were given their own air force. The RAF Balkan Air Force was made up of 15 types of Allied aircraft, including these Spitfires. Air superiority had the power to make a huge difference to the war. The man who was put in charge of all bomber and fighter operations was Fitzroy Maclean. Not only could he now coordinate all future supply drops to the partisans, but he could also plan to attack strategic targets from the air. He would later say the Air Force gave him an incalculable advantage in obtaining quick results. Maclean's Air Force would swing the battle comprehensively in favor of the partisans. After the Air Force came the ground troops. British and American commandos were dropped into the country to train and fight with the partisans. Here, Fitzroy Maclean inspects and addresses some of the Allied troops after their arrival. They trained the partisans like a professional army, preparing them to retake their country. But other events were moving just as fast.
The men on the ground pushed north, and in 3 weeks were in Rome.
Okay, I have something else to do right now, so it looks like we'll have to stop here and then continue with the third. How they say, third time the charm.